What's up, guys? In today's video, I've got my Toyota Tacoma hooked up to my car dolly. We're gonna head up to northern New Mexico and pick up a new project. Let's get to it. Pretty late in the evening, it's almost dark, but I am back home with my 2009 Subaru Impreza. Needs an engine, but I've got everything to put it back together. All right, and jumping straight into it, I am cleaning off the surface of this block. I picked up this block off a 2009 Subaru Legacy. I picked the car up for parts, knowing I was going to need a lot of it for this project. So I'm going to go ahead and get everything cleaned up and ready for mating surface of the heads to go on. Heads just got surfaced, so I need to make sure everything's nice and flat. So as well as picking up a car for a block, the block I picked up had bent valves, as you can see. So I went ahead and picked a set of heads up off of my buddy up in Durango over at Z's Performance. I'm gonna go ahead and get these things unpacked, see what they look like. I know one of them, I believe this one, has a valve out of the head. He needed a keeper. And I think they both are surfaced, ready to go. So I should be able to slap them on this block that I just cleaned up and get everything put together. Here you'll see me unwrapping the heads. I'm gonna go ahead and get everything ready. This one's missing a valve, so I'm gonna go ahead and pull my spare head off of the shelf, get the valve train disassembled, pop the valve out of it. Love this valve tool I've got. Real easy to use. You see there, it just took one little pop. I've got the retainer and everything magneted into the tool. Then I'm gonna go ahead and oil up and install the valve on this new head, get everything ready to go. Went ahead and started assembling the rest of the valve train, get the intake and exhaust rockers on, get everything torqued down. You want to make sure you go tight but not too tight. Clean up the head one last time, set the head gasket on, and put the head on. After that, I can start putting the head bolts in. Once I get them in, I will lightly set them in with the impact and then go ahead and start torquing them in order. After you get them on for the first time, you're going to need to take them all off by 180 degrees twice. Then you're going to need to do the sequence 3 or 4 different times just to make sure that you get everything cinched down tight, flat, and evenly to avoid warpage or cracking of the heads. You're going to go ahead and repeat that process on the other side, getting everything torqued to spec, ready to adjust the valves and get everything back together. All right, now that I've got the heads back on this thing, everything torqued down to spec, I'm gonna go ahead and start assembling the front of the motor. I've got some plastics, the cam gears, and all of the timing accessories to put on. After that, we'll jump on to the next thing, which is probably gonna be adjusting the valves to make sure they're lashed properly. Assembling the front of these Subarus goes pretty quick. It's pretty easy. You just want to make sure you get everything on. This one was pretty stripped down. I had to get the heads reassembled first, and then I went ahead and jumped on to getting the timing belt accessories on. Got all the pulleys replaced, tensioner, made sure I got all the plastics in. Belt looked good. Made sure the engine was in time. Went ahead and pulled the timing tensioner, got everything done. Everything's looking great. I spun the engine over. Everything's still lined up. Belt feels great. So I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to spin the engine over, I'm going to get these valves adjusted. Adjusting these valves is pretty easy, but like on any engine, it's kind of tedious and time-consuming process. You want to make sure you're doing it right, you want to make sure there's no preload on the valves, and you want to make sure everything's adjusted properly. That way when it goes together, there's no valve train noise or any issues with valves sticking open. Now I got to go ahead and start assembling the rocker covers. This is really satisfying. It starts to make the engine feel like it's complete. Getting everything together, oil sealed up, then I can jump onto the front timing cover. Since the timing components are all on, I can put the timing cover on, and once that's on, it's pretty much ready to drop in the bay. Get the harmonic balancer on, and then we're done. All right, and we got the engine together. So I'm gonna go ahead, I'm gonna get this car into my shop so I can get the engine in the bay, get this car back on the road. It's getting dark out, it's getting cold out, so I'm gonna get moving. Definitely struggled a bit getting the car into the shop. It would definitely be nice to have some help around, but I'm by myself for now. As you can see, I am missing my exhaust. I've got the exhaust off of the 09 Legacy sitting over in the corner. While the engine is out of here, the car's gonna be about 3 inches taller with the suspension unloaded. I'm gonna go ahead and crawl under, and I'm gonna get this exhaust hooked up. All right, so as you can see, that's about where the exhaust is going to be. Maybe not perfect, but it is just right in front of that cross member. Those two O2 sensor wires come up this front side of the engine. So I'm going to go see what it looks like underneath, see if it lines up, and see if the 09 Legacy and Imprezas have the same catalytic converters. It looks like the exhaust is going to line up perfect. All right, and now we're going to go ahead and get the engine on the engine hoist and get it started dropping in the bay. It went real smooth. Actually, I was super excited. It's pretty unfortunate that as soon as I got it in the bay, I noticed that the dowel pins were still in both the engine and transmission. This is one of the issues you face when you pull an engine from a different car and put it into the car you're working on. So I'm gonna go ahead and pull the engine back out just enough to get that dowel pin out and removed. That way we can get this engine the rest of the way in. Luckily, pulling the engine and getting the dowel pin out was not too hard. Getting the dowel pin out was a little bit of a fight, but didn't take too long at all. Then all of a sudden the engine was back in like it never happened. Really, just a breeze. All right, last night was awesomely productive. We got the engine in the bay, we got the new oil filter on, it's ready to fill up with oil, but first we gotta get the motor mounts in, we gotta get the bell housing bolts in, we gotta get the flex plate bolts in and get this motor dressed. Once it's dressed, we can see if this 2009 Legacy intake and wiring harness, as well as all the accessories, because this did come with pretty much nothing in the bay, are gonna run in this 2009 Impreza. So, I don't know, but Subarus or Legos, so we're here to find out for sure. Alright, and the first thing I do is I jump under and I get the motor mounts on and I get the exhaust on. We're not going to tighten it all the way down at first because I want to be able to get both sides on without too much binding. Then I can go ahead and get everything cinched down tight and make sure there's no exhaust leaks. After I get the exhaust finished up, I'm going to go ahead and start working on the torque converter bolts. You want to get those in, you want to put some Loctite on them. You don't want those falling out. That could be a very bad day. Once that's done, I go ahead and move on to getting all of the bell housing bolts in and tight. Once they're in, you can get them all tightened down. Some of them are definitely a little bit more tedious to get in than others, especially the bottom ones on these Subarus, but just slow and steady wins the race. After that, you can get the starter on, as well as the lost bell housing bolt. Then I can move on to getting that top motor mount in, and then I can move on to what I consider dressing the motor. Now, when I say dressing the motor, what I speak of is putting all of the accessories that are needed to run the motor on the motor. From the intake to the alternator, power steering pump, and AC compressor, all of that is required to make the engine function properly in the car. When you get an engine from like a wholesaler, you get what they call a long block, which has none of that on it. Dressing the motor is essentially just getting it ready to run in the car without any issues. So, as I get it together, I definitely noticed there were a few things that weren't quite the same. So, we're continuing working on this thing. If you hop over here to the fuel system, I kept the entire fuel system from the car, all the way intake and return from the 09 that I pulled apart. And this 09 that's here, as you can see, the return on this is got a regulator inline here, small, sleek, real easy to take care of. But if you look down here, it looks like the regulator for the 09 Impreza, which is what this is, the Impreza. Motor's out of a Legacy, so is the intake and wiring harness. It has a pretty big regulator down here that's bolted to the inner fender. So I'm going to go ahead and try and bypass that, and since I have the entire return system that goes all the way to right there, I'm just going to pull from the regulator they've got on the 09 Impreza. I'm going to pull all of that off with the regulator and see if this itself works. Don't know for sure. Alright, so getting all this fuel system figured out wasn't too hard. As soon as I got the stuff unbolted from the inner fender well, it was a breeze putting the stuff that was already on the intake back on. Then I just got this AC compressor line routed and I could move back onto the power steering. I started getting it fit up and immediately I found some issues. Alright, so I am actually fully invested right now in getting this power steering system working. This power steering pump came in the back of the car, but I do not think this power steering pump went to this car. See, it's got this side feed for the high pressure line, and here is, you can see the line that came off of it has got this straight fitting that was actually lining up with this face of it, so it was like it was to bolt on top or on the front, but instead it was bolting on the side, which wasn't going to work for me. So luckily I pulled the line off of the 09 Legacy that I had this engine from. The 09 Legacy seems to have the proper line. It's got this bend at the end, which is going to line it up perfect with the side of the high pressure line. So I'm going to go ahead and get this thrown in. Alright, and just like the fuel system, getting this power steering system together was a breeze. I just had to get a few things put together. One and the other were a little different, but not too bad. Then I could get the AC compressor on. After I got that on, again, it was very clear very quickly that I wasn't going to be able to make it to work in this application. Moving on to the airbox, I got it together. Once I got that on, I went ahead and started putting the cooling system together. The fans were already on the radiator, so I just had to install everything, get it bolted up, and get the lines run to it. After that, I finished putting in the airbox, and we were getting close to starting. Needed to fill it up with oil, so I went ahead and got 5 quarts, filled it with oil. It had already gotten an oil filter change. After that, I checked it, started filling it with coolant. Put some water in it, some coolant in it, tried to make sure it was a good 50-50 mix, got the battery out and replaced, and it was time to see if it'd start. And at a few seconds into cranking, it was starting to become clear that it had an issue. I didn't know what yet, but I definitely knew that something wasn't quite right. After finally getting it to start, the dash was lit up like a Christmas tree, the oil pressure light was on, the check engine light was on, and I was concerned. One of the first things I did was I got out and checked the oil. Having good oil, I went ahead and went in the car and tried to investigate some more, see if I could find a correlation as to what was going on. As you can see, I would crank and the oil pressure light would go off. I'd turn the key off and back on. I would start it and the oil pressure light would stay on. It was something that was very confusing and I had never experienced before. So I went inside to contemplate. When I came back out, I came out to this huge mess. I was super disappointed with myself. I forgot to hook up one of the automatic transmission cooler lines. Right there you can see the line blew off and poured a gallon onto the ground. On top of that, after about 45 minutes of diagnostic, I finally found that my issue was all a bent pin in the connector to the ECU at the back of the engine. Right here you can see it's touching 2 other pins. After I fixed that, I went ahead and started it, no issues. Feeling good after it starting and having no issues, I decided I was going to finish putting it back together. Got the accessories on, and I finished topping it up with coolant. Made sure there was no more bubbles in it, bled the system, finished putting the overflow on, and it was time to get this car out of my garage. Next was pulling the hood down from the service position back into the regular position so I could turn it back into a normal car. So we've got the Subaru here warming up, pretty well done. Water pumps changed, timing belts changed, everything's good to go. So we're gonna go ahead and take it for a first drive. Bring you guys along with me. Seems to drive decent. Seems to be running okay. I do not know how long this thing's been sitting. And I do know that gas these days is garbage, so I think I'm gonna take it back to my house and put about 5 gallons of premium in a gas can and see if that might help improve the runnability. Other than that, pretty stoked.